let's just try to take 1 minute. What I want you to do is just make a little doodle. See if you can get a body that has the right proportions with this head. And just a couple of lines out there to guide you in if you had to draw a bill on it. And see if you can get the inflection point in the bill, the general proportions of that bill to head. See if, just with a few lines, what you can get. Doesn't look right, does it? And if you kind of have this feeling in your body of like, that's not right, then yeah, isn't it hard to make that head that small on your paper?
It's too big.
And even knowing that that's the challenge. So if it ends up being too big, just on the same piece of paper, draw a smaller one. So these are the initial lines that it's totally plastic. But what we often do is once we get a few lines, especially if we push hard, we will just go, I'm just going to go with it. Right? It's here. Right? No, just this first part of the drawing. It's really plastic. For show of hands, how many people's first head that they put down was too big? More than half the room. Right? So, isn't that interesting? Just something to pay attention to. This bird's about to fly away.
What kind of bird is that?
This is a long-billed curlew. Yeah, it does. Some birds like the red-winged black bird. You know, that's a good name. Let's take a look at necks. So generally speaking, bird necks make a big S shape. And they can straighten this out or crunch it down. When they crunch it down, it folds up like a big S on top of itself. And sometimes the chest of the bird then looks a little bit more puffy. When they straighten out, the chest of the bird looks a little bit more flat. Yeah, check out these guys. So this point in here as comes over to here is right there. Right there. It's right there. Yeah.
So I think the reason the chest looks more puffy is because that chest is the neck.
Yes. Exactly right. She says that chest looks more puffy. She says what you're actually seeing there is the neck. She's absolutely right. So as that neck comes down, it's got to go somewhere, right? So here is an approach to drawing these necks. So first, just note, look at these cool angles in here. Look at that. I mean, there are, the way that this neck bends is making some really specific and interesting angles. There's a tendency that we have just to draw a head as like, you know, there's kind of, you get these kind of garden hose necks between the head and the body here. I'm going to show you a slight variation to this approach of drawing, for drawing long-necked birds that I use. It's slightly different than what I was, so I started off like this. I was, you know, we have the head up here, we have the body down here, and then you just draw your neck between them. When you do that, you get a lot of these kind of garden hose necks, right? And, you know, if I accidentally drew the head a little bit too far away, then I'd have something like a crazy giraffe neck or gerenuk neck, or too close to it, then it would be like this sort of, you know, football player neck. And so, just when I'm drawing these, it's hard to sort of see if I got that right, just when I'm putting these things in. So here's a slightly different approach for these drawing long-necked birds. And what I do is I start with my head, and I give it a beak. And then I'm just going to look at the negative space on one side of the neck. What is the shape on one side of the neck looking for, and I can either do that in the front or the back, depending on which is more interesting to me. What is the shape? Where are there those changes in angles? And again, negative space is looking at this zone that is not the bird. You're looking at the shape of the air in front of the bird. Where are those inflection points? Where are those corners? Right. One way of doing this also is you could also just sort of look up there at the bird, and without looking down at your paper, just sort of draw what people call a blind contour, and you can get very often a really satisfying neck shape. And then I would attach my head onto that. So I start with that. I've got half this thing in. These negative shapes are going to really make all sorts of different patterns depending on what this bird is doing with its head. Look at these possibles for negative shapes. All right? So you're not looking at the neck, you're looking at the shape of the air that is next to the neck. Then, what I'm going to do is, I used to just, at this point, I would, do the same thing for the back of the neck and look at the negative shapes. You probably can tell that that's where I'm going to be going shortly. But before we actually do that, there's one other little step that makes a big difference. We're going to be dropping in the back of the neck in a moment, but we don't want it to be too skinny or too fat. So I'm just going to put in a few little spacer dots just to help me keep my neck thick enough. Don't put in a lot of them. If you put in a lot of them, what people tend to do is then come along and do it dot to dot and follow from one dot to the next to the next to the next. But you're not really observing the shape of the back of the neck when you're doing this. You're just paying attention to how thick it is. So a few dots will kind of roughly keep you honest with your neck thickness. Then I'm going to do the negative shape on the back side of the head. And look at this. Notice that I actually didn't land squarely on that dot, that little spacer point in there. Actually, I missed that one too. That one's off a little bit too. So on some of these little dots in here, I'm not going dot, 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 dot. Right? They're there just to roughly make sure that I keep the general proportions of this neck. Right? The negative space in here again is a really useful thing to look at. And I get that, I can block out the major angles and turning points of this bird's neck. Notice that there are some really sharp corners in here. Right here is a really sharp corner. Right here is a really sharp corner. So what is actually happening is on this side I have a sharp corner opposite a rounded corner. And here I have a sharp corner versus an opposite a rounded corner on the opposite side. Can you see that? What's going on here for the anatomy geeks in the room is that my bird's spine is actually coming down like this. It is connecting to the back of the head here, coming up here, and then coming down in the front here. So the bird's vertebrae is in the back of the neck up here, cuts across. So these sharp corners are where bone meets skin. And the fleshy esophagus and trachea are actually crossing over right at this point here. So that means that is making this end up here rounded and then rounded down on this end. Up in here, I've got a sharp corner where the bone is cutting across.
Does the trachea just go on one side of the spine?
Yeah, so it'll go on one side of the spine. And I don't know whether it's on the right or the left, but yeah, it does this midpoint crossover. Next time you see one swallowing a gopher, you'll see it'll go smoothly, it'll pause here, and they'll do some things like this, and get it past that point, and on it goes. So that's this sort of the gore point where
And
it's.
if you look at them head on, though, do you see sort of their,
I haven't been able to pick up
Yeah.
that, but it'd be really interesting. Or on a dead one, it'd be interesting to see if you could feel that, where that happens. That'd be really cool to look for. Let's give it a try with this bird. This bird is going to be up here for a couple of minutes, and you can either do it one of two ways. Either just start with drawing this negative space, right? And you can do that. Just try. You might try it as blind contour. Don't look down at your paper. Just put your pencil down and imagine that your pencil is a little ant working its way along, and sort of feel each little change in the curve. Then stick a head on that, and then spacers on the back side. Or start with your head and beak, and work this shape, looking for those corners. Put your spacers in, go for the back shape. Look at this sort of neat shark fin shape back there. See what happens when you give that a try. You may find that as you make your lines, if you are making one clean, deliberate line, that it is hard for your brain to sort of see where that is right or wrong. Because it's on your paper, especially if you push hard, your brain's going to go, yeah, that must be right. Another way of doing that is just to sort of keep it sketchy and kind of roughly kind of block things in and then refine that. Sort of, you kind of keep it sketchy. That's a much sort of less committal way to kind of put those sketchy elements in there. Put in spacers and get that back shape.
Into the head that far, it's really hard to get even proportions.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
What's the head and what's the bill?
Yeah, so on most birds that we're used to, the bill would be doing this. And it's just that so if the bill was doing that, stopping right there, then that kind of looks like a normal bird head. But this bird, on this part of the body, just has no feathers right in there. So it's got kind of the sort of the standard shape. We can imagine this coming in here. That would be what your sort of basic generic bird face would be doing. This one just has no feathers up in there going to the eye. This bird will be around for about 30 more seconds. On this one, let's try it again, but this time just as an experiment. Let's try this blind contour thing. Take your pencil, put it down on your paper, and without looking at your paper at all, you're just going to follow along like you're a little ant along that line there. Just don't look down, just go slow, follow it down. Go to the little flat shelf, down, and then when you come to the end down here, then just stick a head on top of that line. Sometimes people find that using that approach, they can get sort of an initial line that feels much more like what they're seeing in front of them. And the reason is you're paying more attention to what's on the screen than what's on your paper. Makes you really look at the critter instead of the way that you think it should look. This bird will be here for about 45 more seconds. So I'm intentionally not giving people time to finish any of these drawings. Really just sort of focus on that neck for right now. Take a look at that negative shape. That negative shape, if you put in a different negative shape behind the head and it doesn't fit what you're seeing there, then what you want to do is just draw over your other lines. Draw on top of those other lines. Push it back into there. You're not committed to this one first little line that you make. Yes. Yeah, so that's right. So this great observation. It's coming down, and then it gets thicker, where there's that little crossover area there, and then it comes down there. But as Rich Stalkup said, when the bird and the book disagree, believe the bird. So as these birds move around, you'll see tons of really cool shapes. Using this approach, you can get a real sense for that neck. I find it's much better to get the neck and then attach the body onto it, rather than have a body, have a neck, and hope that you can somehow get between one and the other. Similarly, when I'm drawing a bird on a branch, what some people will do is they'll draw their bird, they'll draw the branch, and then they'll draw the legs going from the bird to the branch. And then sometimes you have to draw really long legs on your bird to kind of get them down there to the branch. If instead you draw your bird, you draw your bird's legs, and then you draw your branch to meet its feet. That's kind of what we're doing here. That trick was taught to me by bird artist Keith Hansen from Bolinas, California. If you're ever in Bolinas, go visit Keith. He sits there in his studio. You can walk up next to him and kind of watch him at work. So let's take a little bit of a look now. We've been playing with the neck. Let's take a look at the legs and the feet of the bird. Here we are inside our bird. Look at this. This bird we have actually the same basic tetrapod ancestor going back. I have a hip, I have a knee, I have a heel, I have a foot. This bird has exactly the same thing going on. Here's its hip. Let's go for red. Here is its hip. Here is its femur. All right. Here's its knee, way up there close to the body. This is yeah. So if you're thinking like Thanksgiving turkey, think this is the thigh meat, this is the drumstick. Just that this bird has a very long handle on its drumstick. All right? This is technically the equivalent, with me, to my foot. Just all these sort of metatarsal bones in here, in the long bones in the middle of my foot, those are all fused together into this big bone right here. And then the toes attach on the end of that. So this is actually what joint? The ankle. Right? Its knee is hidden underneath its feathers. This length of this bone is going to change in different birds. So you want to pay attention to how close to the body is this little ankle joint. Sometimes it's right up here. Right? So you just sort of see this coming down out of here. Right? Sometimes it'll be super short. Other times, crazy long. So, not a bird with broken knees, it's a bird with normal ankles. In this one, its ankle is right in here. Really close to the body. So a general approach that I have in drawing these bird legs is, here's my body. I will look how far down is the ground. Get that general proportion. Then I look how far down this space do I find my heel.
Do you look at where the eye is in the body? I mean, look at where the legs are in that. I don't know what that is. What is it?
This is the little turn here.
Oh, that's a turn. Okay. It's way back.
Way back. Isn't that interesting?
Surprised it doesn't go.
Something that is confusing about looking at birds is that it's not as, I used to sort of think of, just sort of imagine this as all carved out of wood, where would the balance point be? Well, actually, a lot of this is sort of fluff and feathers in here. The inside of that is hollow. Right? So really the weight, there's some weight in here. Most of the weight is right in here, in the body of the bird. That's where the bird is going to carry its weight. It's important to do that for the purposes of flight. If it has, for instance, it had a heavy head with teeth in it, right? And it starts to fly, it would be, that's going to be pulling it down. It would have to be fighting against that. So to counterbalance that, it would have to have a heavy weight back here. Then the whole weight of the entire thing has gone up. You need some counterbalance for heavy weight in the front so that you're not, tipping that way. So what the birds do is all of their body weight gets concentrated here to the center of the bird. So think of this as the real telltale part of the bird.
What is that?
That's one of those birds.
Good.
I'll go for a yellow legs. I am, as far as identification goes, I'm an okay birder. Right? There's some people who are absolutely phenomenal and amazing. I'm a good observer and an okay birder. And for me, the real fun thing is that people think that if you make field guides, you must have all this stuff out. I make field guides because I want to bring them with me. So let's think about the feet, what the feet do. If your bird's in water, you don't have to draw your feet.
Yay.
If it's in soggy mud, you won't be able to see the feet. But don't be afraid of feet. You don't have to hide them. Most of the shorebirds, you're not going to see their feet. But sometimes you will see feet out there. So this is the way that we often sort of think about birds' feet. How many toes forward? 3 toes forward. How many back? Right, so here's like our universal symbol for bird foot, right? So what people will do on their bird here is that they will go like this, right? Here's my bird.